Hi, my name is Alex and my partner Zilu and I will be presenting our topic about real-life consequences of in-game actions, where we will be exploring how video games affect a gamer's life, behavior, and possible decision-making. We will be looking at multiple domains within this topic. The first thing we'll be covering provides the foundation of video game ethics, which relates to meta-ethics specifically, where we will be asking the fundamental questions that may or may not be answered the same by everybody. The next will be behavioral theory, where we will seek to explain human behavior while analyzing the possible consequences in one's environment and learned associations acquired through previous experience. Another topic we will touch upon is game studies, which is also dubbed ludology. This covers the study of games, the act of gamers playing them, and the cultures that surround these games. Lastly, cognitive science will allow us to study the mind and how video games affect the cognitive function of gamers. Now, we'll jump right into meta-ethics, which contains a valid question with regard to video games. Do our actions in video games really matter? Well, a rationalist such as Kant might suggest that they don't matter due to the fact that not all things deserve moral consideration, such as video game avatars. Video game avatars are technology-based and can't reason, which would be one characteristic of something not worthy of moral consideration in a rational person's view. They might argue that video games are purely for the use of entertainment and hold no value in real life. Also, many factors play into who or what is deserving of moral consideration, and answers differ from person to person. For example, when I was a kid, I used to play the game on the Nintendo DS called Nintendogs, where the player would essentially own their own virtual dogs and would have to take care of them periodically. They would need to do this in order to keep them alive and to keep playing. I took great care of these dogs and didn't mistreat them, for example, due to one factor being cuteness, where we may give more moral consideration to a cute animal as we have sympathy for it, even virtually. So one may think it matters to take care of a virtual dog solely due to their cuteness, influencing their deserving of moral consideration. Also, there's the reload feature, where you can simply save and restart the game, which would take away all consequences from your in-game decisions or actions. All egoist factors that influence the conformity to moral standards, such as the desire for social recognition as a moral person, wishing to fit in with society, or the fear of punishment, are all erased due to the lack of consequence, so the gamers can essentially do whatever they want, entertainment being a rationalist argument for why these actions don't really matter. On to virtue theory. A virtue theorist might say the opposite, yes, for example, as the outcome doesn't matter and all actions must be virtuous according to one's unique definition of what is virtuous. You might ask how this relates to real life. Well, an example I came up with is someone who considers kindness a virtue may feel the effects of possibly unkind actions of video games in real life due to their strong dedication towards being virtuous in general. So, immoral actions committed in video games might matter to one conforming to a specific virtue. Another important question to think about is who might be responsible for the decisions you make in video games. Although this seems like a simple question due to the fact that one is usually responsible for his or her own actions, a few perspectives will be discussed. One perspective might blame it on the video game developers, as in story games and butterfly effect games, for example, the developer has made a preset story or set of options you must follow in order to play the game. In this case, the video game developer forces the gamer to follow certain rules and objectives. Of course, if a gamer were to dislike anything about the game, they could simply stop playing it at any time. This is one of the reasons why Perspective 2 puts the blame on the gamers, as in sandbox games such as GTA 5, the gamer has the freedom to do anything without any game objectives. For example, someone playing GTA can choose to kill someone with an RPG if they want, which will send police on a high-speed chase after the character. One can go around driving in his or her Bugatti Chiron while playing the game without such immoral actions if they please as well. To a certain extent, the video game genre does play a role and limits what you can do, but the gamers have the freedom in sandbox games nonetheless. To go over a few examples of decision-based games, I've selected a survival horror game on the left called Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, and an interactive story game on the right called Until Dawn. I've personally played both of these games, and they both contain a decision-making dynamic to an extent. In Resident Evil, a young man named Ethan drove to Dulvey, Louisiana to find his missing girlfriend, where he ran into some unexpected trouble due to a psychotic and supernatural family. In the scene shown in the picture, Ethan found only one vaccine that can cure someone of some sort of evil possession. On the left is his girlfriend Mia, and on the right is someone who had helped Ethan to escape the crazy family, and her name is Zoe. The game makes you choose who to save. This is the hardest decision in the game, and the game essentially forces you to only pick one of them, and to leave the other to possibly die there. In Until Dawn, the developers utilized this kind of decision making throughout the whole game. It's set in a cabin in the woods in Blackwood Mountain, where a bunch of teenagers went to hang out and ended up having to survive things that threatened their life. In this picture, it shows the two options of fast or safe, which represents the whole dynamic of the game, where it forces the player to make a quick decision from the two preset options.
For example, from a psychological point of view, gamers that tends to stick with the same game for a long period of time tends to have various consequences. It could be positive, so for example, if a player plays a lot of management games such as Football Manager 2020, then it's likely that he or she will acquire a more strategic thinking in his day-to-day life. But if, let's say, the person plays games that involve microtransaction and gambling, then it's likely that he or she is going to be overly stressed over time due to the tremendous pressure built within the game. Another thing to consider is the social interaction aspect. So, for example, Hall of Heroes is a game built for teenager adults in which you can roleplay as heroes. And participants report a lower psychological stresses and better emotional responses after having played this game. And this helps them for real life interaction in an eventual time. Obviously, this is not applicable to all games if one were to play Call of Duty, for example. So now on to the skills knowledge acquired through video game and the societal implications of it. So one of the first example is that in soccer, some professional teams don't allow their players to play FIFA on a daily basis, and that is due to the fact that some players cannot separate their in-game avatars from themselves in real life. So that leads to a drop in terms of performance level, basically. This is something that not only soccer players should consider, but also athletes from other domains as well. Secondly, the use of video game or things that are similar to video games in the context of military. This is a very troublesome potential in trend in the next 10 to 20 years. Is because one, we already use or employs such similar technology when we control drones to carry out attacks against potentially innocent civilians, but also with the advancement of technology, we can see scenarios such as the ones in Ender's Game happening in real life. What happened in Ender's Game is essentially a fictional book in which a child commander basically wiped out the entire civilization because he thought that what happened on the screen was only a simulation, but in fact it was physically happening in real life. So the use of the kind of simulation slash video game aspects in the context of military can potentially lead to a lot more complex problems within the next 10 to 20 years. Thirdly, video games with political messages. Now, this has nothing to do with most people, but if you're a politician and you play certain genre of games that have very heavy political messages or implications behind them, then you might act differently, or your actions in real life might be different when it really matters. Games such as Frostpunk or Bioshock have very strong political messages behind them. And while this is likely not to be a big trouble for most people, since it's only a minority that works for the government or in the high command chain, but the research that have been done in this area is simply not enough for us to arrive at a definite conclusion as to whether politicians should be able to choose to play whatever games they want, or should there be some kind of restrictions built upon it. And finally, there is the problem of unethical business practices promoted by certain advert games. Essentially, what an advert game is games that are produced by corporations in order to promote their brand. Now, this could be a problem if a corporation decides to promote their own thinking or ideology that might not be at the benefit of humanity as a whole. For example, if you play an advert game created by McDonald's and your game objective is to maximize the profit, then that could be a problem, because then that thinking, that drive, to maximize the profit might be integrated in your brain in real life. And that could be very much troubling if tens of thousands of people arrive at that same conclusion.